When he vanished, a footprint evaporating into mist, a door swinging forever on one broken hinge, my sister, with her mouth full of thunder, said, "How wicked he was, how wild." And I said, "Maybe." When he returned, dragging wilted apologies behind him like dead foxes, my best friend, sighing through teeth stitched with pity, said, "How noble, he crawls back to you." And I said, "Maybe." When he returned again, arms full of bouquets plucked from the graveyards of yesterday, my best friend, eyes sharp as shattered glass, said, "How brave, how broken he looks." And I said, "Maybe." When we stitched our names into a shroud of promises, and it unravelled in the first fierce wind, my mother, with hands like cracked maps, said, "How blind you are, how brittle." And I said, "Maybe." When he kissed me, and the clocks above us wept black syrup, when even the sky bruised under the weight of our wanting, my neighbour, peering through the lattice of her own loneliness, said, "How beautiful, how boundless." And I said, "Maybe." When I found another woman's laugh clinging to the sleeves of his coat, like thorns tangled in velvet, my brother, breath boiling in his throat, said, "How cruel, how careless." And I said, "Maybe." When I folded my love into the trunk of a tree that no longer grew, dragged it through deserts where the stars refused to speak, the woman downstairs, who wore sorrow like silk, said, "How strong you are to survive the slaughter." And I said, "Maybe." When I screamed into pillows that swallowed sound like swamps, when grief curled at the corners of my mouth like smoke from a smouldering ruin, the bartender, polishing glasses polished down to bone, said, "How lonely you seem, how lost." And I said, "Maybe." When I walked barefoot through gardens of broken clocks and rusted moons, and the trees sang dirges for the loves that never bloomed, the old man feeding pigeons said, "How free you are now, how fierce." And I said, "Maybe." When someone new, with hands carved from patience and breath spun from silver, threaded laughter through the locked jaw of my fear, the florist arranging a funeral lily said, "How lucky you are, how blessed." And I said, "Maybe." When he stayed, even when the rain grew teeth and tore at our roof, even when the dark rivers rose to kiss our throats, my friend, cloaked in all the winters we had outlived, said, "How real this is, how rare." And I said, "Maybe." And now as I stand where the garden meets the ruins, where the dead seeds dreamed themselves into wild flowers, where sorrow shaped the riverbed that carried me here, I see it clearly. The blessing braided through the loss humming inside the blessing. And I say maybe, always maybe, forever maybe. Behind the lines. To me, this poem is a meditation in motion, a reckoning with the shape-shifting nature of love, fate, and consequence. It's not a story of victory or victimhood. It's the slow, patient unfurling of truth, stitched between the bruises and blessings life hands us without warning. Like the ancient Chinese parable known as the parable of the Chinese farmer, it reminds me that every event, every betrayal, every homecoming, every ruin and resurrection carries 1,000 possible meanings, none of which we can fully name while standing inside them. This poem isn't about heartbreak or healing in a simple sense. It's about standing at the crossroads of every moment and refusing to claim certainty. It's about resisting the easy temptation to name something good or bad when life is still mid-sentence. Every maybe in this piece is a breath held against the storm, a hand extended into the dark, trusting that the meaning will ripen in its own time. The metaphors bleed and bloom, gardens of broken clocks, trees wearing ash, rivers rising with teeth, because love, like life, is messy, cyclical, sometimes cruel, sometimes miraculous. The surreal imagery is deliberate. It mirrors how memory twists, how grief paints shadows where there were once doorways, how hope stitches wildflowers into old scars without asking permission. At its core, this poem is a surrender, not of power, but of illusion. It's an acknowledgement that we don't get to be the architect of every outcome. We don't always get to call something a blessing or a curse. We only get to live it, breathe it, lose it, find it again. To move through every burning, blooming hour with a heart still open enough to say, maybe. This poem is not a map. It's a ritual of patience, a hymn to uncertainty, a quiet, relentless faith that whatever this moment is, Joy, devastation, deliverance. It is not the end. It is only the beginning of something we cannot yet name. And so I write it, and so I live it. With hands open, with heart open, with a single word stitched into every step. Maybe, always maybe, forever maybe.